Thank you for taking some of your Friday afternoon and being with us in community today. We really, really appreciate it. My name is Sheila Sanchez. I use she, her pronouns. I work in the Diversity and Access Office, and I have been here about 18 years now. My role on campus is to support members of the public with disability-related accommodations. I also work a lot with students in the non-academic space for disability accommodations. Also work in the built environment to help reduce barriers, physical barriers. So that's a little bit about me. A little bit about the program. I'm going to do some housekeeping first, and then we'll start things off. Housekeeping, if you don't know where the restrooms are, straight back and to your left. Our program today will be about from 3 to 4:15-ish. Then we're going to have a reception and eat and drink and be merry and get to know each other a little bit better. So I want to give a couple of shout outs first. I want to welcome Dr. Crystal Hill, who's in the back of the room here. Dr. Hill is from Ohio University, but is a transplant to Stanford. As of the last 2 months, she is officially the new inaugural Assistant Vice Provost for the Office of Accessible Education. So she oversees all of the OAE staff and community and supports students with academic and housing accommodations. So thank you, Crystal, for being here today. We really appreciate it. Okay, so let's kick us off. I'm going to read from a script here because if I go off script, I'm going to be too long-winded. We're thrilled to announce that the Stanford Historical Society's collections now include over 24 interviews from the Disability at Stanford Oral History Project. The Oral History Project launched in the summer of 2020. This important project was the inspiration of Allison Al Carter-Davis, who's one of our panelists today. For her efforts as the project co-founder and coordinator, she was the 2024 recipient of the Susan Schofield Oral History Award, which is given annually by the Stanford Historical Society for excellence in the practice of oral history. So thank you to Al for including disability in part of the Oral History Project. Natalie Marine Street, who is right over here running camera, is a historian and manager of the Oral History Program. She helped Al with her vision to bring her vision to life and supported this project from the beginning. She is here with us today, back here, obviously, coordinating all the documentation efforts, continuing to bring history to life through interviews, but she also keenly hopes that these interviews will inspire additional oral history and archival initiatives. So after, when we're sort of commingling, definitely reach out to Natalie and Alan talking about how you might be interested in being a part of this project. The Disability at Stanford Oral History Project documents the evolution of disability access, advocacy, and social justice at Stanford, including historical origins, key turning points, and stories in danger of being forgotten. It records the lived experiences of members of the disability community, asking how they navigated the disability landscape during their time here at Stanford, posing questions about relationships between identity and disability, and probing for dreams of a more perfect world. We wanted to offer a special thanks to all of the project interviewees, several of whom are here with us today, as well as the interviewers for the project, specifically Al, Ann Battle, Lloyd May, Danny Codmer, and Rosa Gonzalez. Thank you as well to the Stanford Historical Society, the University Archives, and the Provost Office for supporting the project, and to the Office of Accessible Education for hosting the space, helping with setup. Special shout out to my tech support, Robin Cole. I couldn't have done this without you. The Diversity and Access Office and the Disability Community Space, we really appreciate them hosting and coordinating some of the logistics for this event. Also, a special thank you to the Disability Staff Forum. They are hosting the reception that we'll be having afterwards today. So next, we want to just showcase a brief montage of this work around the Stanford Oral History, Disability Oral History Project, and invite you to review more content on the Historical Society's website or view some additional clips. We'll have them running up in this room and over at the disco space. So there's a whole montage that you can see and view at a later time. And you can also go on the website, as I mentioned. And we hope that these stories will help to ensure that disability is incorporated into the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging fabric of our Stanford culture. So I want to go ahead and pause, and Robin's going to play our clip for us.
When I went to Stanford, there were no resource programs. There were readers from the state, and they paid for that. And there was a mobility instructor that helped me at first, but there was nothing really at Stanford. And I didn't think there should be.
For me, over the course of the years that I've been working here, I have definitely seen students who have been more vocal about things being accessible out of the gate rather than needing to ask for accommodations. If we improve programs and services and make it more inclusive for everyone, it reduces the need for many individuals to even ask for accommodations.
The first quarter I was back, that spring of 78, this person came over to me and he said, "Would you come work for me?" He was an associate provost with the responsibility of implementing 504.
The 504 regulations had finally been signed. Any entity that was getting money through 504, they needed to come up with a transition or implementation plan.
So I put together all the materials, rewrote and straightened out the transition plan. 31 places that need physical architectural change. Which one to do first?
I began building a program of disability student services and broaden our scope to be, really fully accessible to people with all different kinds of disabilities. I would often be then consulted with the admissions office. They'd say, "Hey, we've got this candidate. What can you do?" So it became an in-house consultant. But then as we grew and broadened, I purposely named it the Disability Resource Center because I wanted it really to be clear that it wasn't just about students. It was about really all of us. And it wasn't just about services. It was about providing resources to empower people.
After the Loma Prieta earthquake, Stanford was literally under so much construction, reinforcing the quad. So taking everything down and putting it up. And I would walk sites and make recommendations and talk about how do we connect these paths. And then students were coming to my office with complaints about lack of access.
I ended up going to a couple of Gay and Lesbian Alliance at Stanford events at the fire truck house as a senior. But I hauled myself up the stairs and people helped haul me up the stairs because this was before the elevator was put in. The elevator was put in because Bliss Temple, who was a wheelchair user who was a few years after me, she was the one who pushed to get the money to renovate the fire truck house and make it wheelchair accessible.
The students pushed and threatened a lawsuit to make sure that they got access to the second floor of the fire truck house.
I helped run what was called the Disabled Speakers Bureau. So we were putting together panels of other Stanford students that could go speak about having a disability. We would set them up for the med school. So med school classes would have, basically a panel discussion with us. Or sometimes it was more of a social context where we're doing these for the student dorms. They would have a lot of programming about all kinds of different identity issues.
I had met another student named Vivian Wong. Vivian and I and some other students met in a room in Old Union. Perhaps we had even borrowed the Native American Community Center. We had a brainstorming session. I think that was the inauguration of what became Power to Act. We started a mailing list, we had meetings, I made some great friends through that group. And one of our missions was to get ourselves a community center.
I also started the Stanford Disability Initiative, which is also part of Power to Act, but it has students, faculty, and administration. We kind of pivoted and sort of moved it towards just trying to make disability an integral part of diversity and an integral part of Stanford. And then that was where we got involved with disability studies as an area, and also just making sure that we have a language guide. So we formed a language guide. We got a website for disability at Stanford, and we were working on other initiatives as well. Also launched that Future of Disability at Stanford event for alumni. So that was a way to get alumni involved.
Zena was instrumental in the forming, and I gave her a certificate that said co-founder of SMAC, which it was called the Stanford Medicine Abilities Coalition at the time. So I just started building it and launching it sort of at the same time. And I met with the medical students with disabilities and chronic illness, and they put together like a 15-page PDF on introducing me to all of the disability issues at the School of Medicine. SMATI was accepted as a subcommittee of the diversity cabinet. So that's like literally the seat at the big table.
Disco is disability community space.
So we call it disco for sure, but it's like dis as in disability, and then co as in community.
This came out of a long history of disability advocacy on campus.
It's so great seeing those clips. I've been here for 18 years, so a lot of the people in that last 18 years I'd known, but to hear the history before that time was just super cool to me. So I really appreciate all of the alums that were giving their stories and telling their experiences. I also want to say hello to our remote audience. I forgot to say hello to you all. So thank you for joining us remotely. We appreciate your participation and are glad you're able to be with us as well. So I am going to turn it over to my partner in crime, Zina Jawadi here, and she's going to lead us in a great discussion. So thank you, Zina.
And thank you, Sheila. First, thank you all for being here today. It's such an honor and pleasure for you to be here. And it's really inspiring to see new faces in the room that I haven't met before. So thank you for taking time out of your busy Fridays to be here. I'll give a brief background about myself, and then we'll do intros of all the panelists. And thank you all for being here as well. And just a brief intro about myself. I went to Stanford I completed my bachelor's and master's at Stanford in class of 2018 and 2019 respectively. I went to medical school at UCLA, and I'm back here now for an MBA. So I love Stanford that much that apparently I needed to come back yet again. But I actually was diagnosed with hearing loss here at Stanford when I was 3.5 years old. And so to be back here and to be here with all the friendly faces is really quite inspiring. So I will next go to Rosa.
Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Rosa Gonzalez, and I was at Stanford from 95 until 2022 as the first ADA Section 504 compliance officer. So I come here, mostly I was faxing back in the day. I don't know who knows what a fax machine is. A job description, and I was working at a law firm and hated my job and had so missed working in disability access. I'd done that at law school because I have low vision myself. So I jumped on it and I got this job and didn't know really what I was doing, but it was a wonderful 27 years.
These are very short. So this is our personal statement time, right? Okay, mine's I asked for a little longer because I want to talk about the project a little bit, and I'm not going to answer the next question. So that's how I broke it down. My name's Al, and I've had Crohn's disease for 52 years. For those of you who don't know, Crohn's is an inflammatory bowel disease, and it's marked, the symptoms are a lot of things people don't like to talk about, like throwing up, diarrhea, pain, and fatigue are the main ones. I first got sick in 1971 when I was going into high school, and excuse me, there goes my pencil. And I was taught not to talk about it. This was pre-ADA, polite West Los Angeles, and polite people and women didn't talk about unpleasant things. So after a few attempts in high school, just being around family and friends, I was quiet, very quiet for 40 years. So that's a long time to keep stuff. And inside there, after high school, I come to Stanford. There was nothing going on at Stanford, basically. Now I've learned through this project, there were a few things going on, and this would be fall of 75. But I didn't know I had a disability. So why would I look for any disability, anything on campus? So that seals that. Fast forward, I get married, we have 3 kids, and then a series of, I'm going to call them God winks. I call them fate, whatever you want. I think, through my story of finding my voice, society's kind of coming along too, like becoming more open to a few things, right? So in 2005, I'm looking on the website of a college, the college our oldest son's going to go to. And I've come across the page that lists 7 accommodations that we provide for at this university. Number 5 is Crohn's disease. I'm like, what? Crohn's is a disability? I had no clue. That's how I found out it was a disability. Call it random, whatever you want to call it. I could do a long story and might be writing one at some point about all these awakening moments that happened to me. I just kept bumping into things. Then I start working on a book at Stanford called Letters Home from Stanford. I'm running around campus quite a lot between 2013 and 2017. As are a lot of other people in this room. These two are working on trying to get this community space together. Rose is starting to donate things to Josh Schneider, the archivist who's here today, for the archives that have to do with disability. I feel like, and Sheila's over there and the ADA, all these pods are happening. And then over the years, this has all come together. But one of the things I noticed, did I say the name of my book? I did. Okay, Letters Home from Stanford. People always go, what does Letters Home from Stanford have to do with the Disability Project? Actually, it has everything to do with it. Because I was on campus working in the archives a lot and then taking lunch breaks and whatnot, I didn't feel a disability presence on campus. And by now with these I was more lumped onto the idea of disability. And I was also frustrated when the book came out that we got no correspondence for it about disabilities. Now I will say the book's not comprehensive. There are a lot of topics that aren't covered in the book because I would work on it till I die if I wanted it to cover every topic I wanted. But I was very frustrated about that. And there started a little inkling of how can we get the disability voices into the mix here at Stanford? So one driving force for me, I would say for me personally, other than what I was noticing or not noticing on campus, was I wanted to give other people the voice I didn't have. Like maybe I can shave off 3 decades for some people if we provide an opportunity for them. So that was kind of the impetus behind that. And I just want to say before I close here, thank you to the Stanford, in particular to all the sponsors here today, but in particular to the Stanford Historical Society and the Oral History Program, because by taking this project on, you validated that myself and other people in this community, that our stories matter, that they have value. And as someone who didn't talk for 40 years, I cannot tell you how gratifying that has been to me. And to my fellow panelists, Vilma, I've just had the pleasure of meeting you, but I've met you in the square, never in person, and you too. And all the people I interviewed have given such a gift to me because I now, as a result of this project, I feel a part of a community and you gave me courage. And I'm just going to say, even 2 years ago, I wouldn't have sat up here and talked today. So thank you. Now I won't shut up. Don't get me started.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Vilma Raman. I use she, her pronouns. And just quickly before I start, just so you all are aware, I came down with COVID about a month ago. I'm currently testing negative and not contagious, but wearing a mask just in case because I do still have a cough because my lungs are screwed up. Anyway, just wanted to provide that context. I am a current master's student here in the computer science department, where I study broadly the implications of critical disability theory on the social impact of AI, and more concretely also how to prevent AI from discriminating against folks with disabilities in a variety of different ways. I am also one of the graduate student coordinators for the disco space here on campus. I encourage you to check it out. It's right across the 2 doors, across the little entrance here. And I'm a relative newcomer to Stanford. I've been here since the beginning of the last school year, 2023. And I'm very excited to look towards the future of what disability can be at Stanford and how to broaden narratives and experiences to make this campus an inclusive place for all.
Hi, everyone. My name's Pete Poulos. I am a middle-aged white guy with short brown hair, wearing jeans and a little bit of a checkered sort of dress shirt. I was at UC San Francisco doing a GI fellowship in 2003 when I had a spinal cord injury and got paralyzed from the neck down. And then had to decide what I wanted to do with the rest of my life after that, and decided that the best option for me would be to become a radiologist. And so I came to Stanford the next year and started my radiology residency. And I joined the faculty here in 2009. And then in 2018, I founded what was then SMAC and is now SMATI, the Stanford Medicine Alliance for Disability Inclusion and Equity. And I've been working on that for the last 5 years. And I speak and do research, and I co-host a podcast called Docs with Disabilities that was started by my friend Lisa Meeks. And yeah, we've got lots of initiatives going on, and Zena and I are trying to figure out how we can combine forces again now that she's back at Stanford.
Excited for it.
Yeah.
Anything?
Nope,
Okay, perfect.
that's good.
Thank you all. That was, by the way, everyone's really downplaying all their achievements. They're all very accomplished. And so I just want to recognize that everything they've done, both professionally, but also for the disability community here at Stanford. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to ask a series of questions for the panelists, and then and some of them will be directed specifically for some specific panelists based on their backgrounds. So my first question to you, and I'll start with Rosa, is what was your experience like at Stanford as a member of the disability community?
As a member of the disability community. Interesting.
And if relevant, how has your perspective of disability evolved throughout your life?
I think like a lot of us that have invisible disabilities, I really didn't speak about it or disclose to a whole lot of people. I just sort of try to memorize. I have a macular degeneration, so I have very little to no central vision, to the point where now I'm sort of, well, I am legally blind. I even, it's hard for me to discuss. There was a small community. Kathy Haas, who's a professor here at Stanford, headed up the Disability Staff Forum. So I attended some of those events, and really, I didn't really see or know other staff or faculty with disabilities. We were all, I think, so busy trying to accommodate ourselves and do the work. I mean, even for myself, I will say Stanford was very generous in terms of whether it was larger monitors that I needed or, different kinds of accommodations. But there were, that was one of the purposes of my job. There wasn't a formal request procedure. There wasn't a person you could contact to say, hey, could I have the handouts, blown up so that I can participate? No, I would just fake it and be struggling. And if in fact I did find somebody who would help me, that would be terrific. So I have learned to self-advocate and be more comfortable disclosing, especially because I think for a long time people just thought I was unfriendly. I'd walk by people and they'd be like, you walk right by me, I wave to you. And so now I always tell people, please don't wave in front of my face. I find that really, really offensive. Tell me your name. Hi, it's Rosa. I'm up on your left, or whatever the case may be. But so I think a lot of that is just education. So.
Do you have anything else?
I said I wouldn't.
Okay.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I am a newcomer to Stanford. Before that, I completed my undergraduate degree over at our rival across the bay at UC Berkeley, where I had an excellent time. And Berkeley is in many ways where the disability rights movement in the country really started to take off. And so it was interesting for me to look at the contrasts between how disability is at Stanford versus at Berkeley. And but I also think that just the era where I am growing up, I am 23 years old. there has been so much progress on both sides of the bay at this point, where I've had the privilege of being welcomed into a very strong, very active, vibrant disability community in both places. And there are natural differences, like, oh, how does being a public university versus a private university affect resources and the capacity to do different things, requirements, all of those sorts of things. But I don't wish to draw divisions here. I think I've had excellent experiences at both universities. And also just being in the Bay Area for so long, I have had such a privilege of like connecting with disability elders that were like there at 504 Disco this weekend, went to the Superfest festival up in San Francisco, which is a disability film festival. And we met some folks that were there at all of those protests decades ago, which was very exciting. And so I guess what I really want to emphasize here is how just our positionality in the Bay Area, both in terms of like the historical significance of this place for disabled folks, but also in terms of the, I guess, progressive mindset that is here more broadly, has been really beautiful to see in both places. In terms of my own disability experience and how that has evolved, I have a visible disability. I'm a wheelchair user with a neuromuscular disability, and I have never like denied my disability. I have been very conscious of it and always framed it as a disability specifically. But one of the things that really like opened my eyes was when I was in high school. My mom sent me like a New York Times op-ed written by somebody who had the same disability that I did, just talking about something like really random about his life, and just seeing how that narrative fit into this broader culture that I didn't even know existed. Something that my parents couldn't talk to me about the same way they could talk about like my ethnic background, my religious background, those sorts of things. It just really opened my eyes to how much of the cultural history I had to learn. And over the next several years, I've gone through a long journey of doing so and really sort of cemented my identity in the United States as a disabled person. And I think that's been really impactful for me.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways I was lucky, or I am lucky to have a disability in the Bay Area. I didn't know much about disability in 2003 at all. I took care of patients with disabilities, and what I saw of their lives when they were in the hospital was like not pretty to me. And you know, I think that's one of the issues with ableism in healthcare is we often see patients at their worst in the hospital, not out in the community thriving and living their lives. And so I assumed that my career was done and I would be in a nursing home, and I don't know, I had no idea what was going to happen, but was the beneficiary of strong mentors who encouraged me to not think about the end of my career, but just how to pivot. And lucky to land at Stanford also. So for me in the Department of Radiology, I was always treated very fairly. I am treated fairly. You know, I have some accommodations that make it possible for me to do my job in a way that makes sense. They don't have me like working fluoroscopy machines, for example, and doing barium enemas or doing procedures on patients or things like that. So I just focus on what I can do most efficiently and most independently, which is a good thing. And I kind of had this naive idea that most people at Stanford were being treated fairly when it came to their disabilities. And it wasn't really until I started SMATI in 2018 and became more visible in the space that people started to come to me and tell me their stories of the unfairness or discrimination or lack of accommodations that they were receiving. And it just made it very clear that it was quite random who got their needs met and who didn't. Could depend on like the type of disability, the type of person and their personality, the luck of the draw in terms of a supervisor who was either open-minded or closed-minded, and maybe who they ran in, who in HR was handling their case. And so just looking at the medical school, I feel like we have made a big impact there, but not nearly to the extent that I would like. Not until, everybody gets the same excellent service. What Sheila said in the video about, building the environment for disabled people is where we need to get to. So people don't need accommodations. They can just show up and do their job.
And I'd just like to add that medicine as a whole is quite inaccessible. I'm saying this is someone who had to deal with, not only as someone who's being a patient, but also navigated the system. For example, many medical schools, I think, actively discriminate against students who have disabilities in the process. Whether they realize it or not is a different story. And I'm saying this across the nation. The medical school entrance exam has regularly denied students accommodations they've had their whole lives. So for example, I've had extra time my whole life and I was denied accommodations, that specific accommodation, which I really needed. And so I actually didn't even finish the passages. How I got into finish that MCAT and got into med school. Sometimes I do. I'm very grateful that I am where I am, but the reality is I was denied accommodations even after appealing. It took me a year and a half to apply for accommodations for the STEP exam, and even then my accommodations were breached. So, the process itself is so actively, there's so many barriers that people have to navigate, not just as patients in medicine, but also if you're in the medical system working as a healthcare provider. And so there's a lot of room for improvement in the field as a whole. So I just wanted to add that context in which you're sharing all these stories as well. I also wanted to ask you a follow-up question because you've had a very interesting story, and so I would imagine that your identity has evolved over time, and we've talked about that. And I'd love for you to share more about how your own identity with disability has evolved over time.
Yeah. So, well, as soon as I was injured, I understood that I had acquired a disability, but I never really wanted to call myself disabled. For me, that was like an employment term more than anything. And I thought, well, if I can work, then I don't really feel comfortable saying that I'm disabled. And I had very little contact with the disability community. Honestly, I felt to just kind of, I'd rather pretend that my disability didn't exist. And I'll just keep living my life with all my like able-bodied friends and whatever and pretend. Because honestly, disability for a long time made me sad more than anything. And, there's like a lot of loss for me tied up in my disability. And I got into arguments with people about like, is being disabled like better or worse or the same as being able-bodied, and these philosophical kind of questions. But, once I started learning more, when I got into this space, I realized that there's like a lot of power in the word disabled and calling oneself disabled. So, in order to build community and to call other people into the movement, I've definitely adopted more of a disabled identity, which I think is like my self-esteem now is much better than it was before when I was trying to just pretend that it didn't exist, because the community has really built me up in a positive way.
Thank you so much for sharing. And just to provide context, because I'm not sure if everyone knows about the term disabled versus like having a disability, a person with disability. Can somebody here share like a brief explanation about what the difference is?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are two, I guess, main categories of language that we tend to see. There's person first language. I identify as a person with a disability. And there's identity first language. I identify as a disabled person. And while that might seem like a difference that doesn't really matter too much. It can mean a lot to an individual depending on your perspective. Person first language obviously emphasizes the humanity in disabled people. And just as you hear me say that, I tend to subscribe more to identity first language because I really like the word disabled as like a verb. Something is doing the disabling, and who or what is it? So these are two different perspectives on how to think about disability and the position of the disabled person with respect to whatever is disabling them.
Thank you for that great
Excellent,
explanation.
yeah.
I just wanted to make sure we had some of the basic terms here, because these are actually really essential parts of like the movement and the disability rights movement, and but also the community here as well. So I just wanted to make sure that we had that definition laid out. Rosa, I wanted to ask you a follow-up question as well, and that is, you've been here at Stanford for a very long time, and so you have like a lot of historical knowledge that we really appreciate. What has been the biggest change over time that you have seen with respect to disability at Stanford and just more in general, more broadly?
Well, I came in 95, and while we had the Rehabilitation Act and had regulations, as you can imagine, the ADA brought in a whole lot of other sort of requirements, meaning like employment, like an asking accommodation, architecturally, much stricter. So that's really when I came to Stanford. The major thing, and one of the reasons I came, was that we had a lot of barriers. This was a university that was, I want to say it was 150 years old at that point when I first came in 95. And so quite a few of the buildings did not have accessible entrances, elevators, bathrooms. I don't think any of the athletic venues, or a few of them did have a handful of wheelchair seating. So for instance, the football stadium had 93,000 seats, and we had 60 spaces for wheelchairs, none of which were in the student area. So it was really a tough place. And I would walk around with students who used chairs, and they'd see like, look, and I'd be walking the quad, and I'd be stepping down into the quad, and they're like, no, we got to go all the way around. And so many times I would do this sort of exercise, and then I would just be like, how does this not make you nutty? And they're like, it does. It does. When all you want to do when you're young is be with your friends, hang out, and not be obvious and have to go around the back. Attitudes were huge. I would be in meetings where I was charged with, hey, let's figure out how to drop in ramps and elevators, and architects would speak up and say, in 25 years, there won't be any wheelchairs. Everything, medicine will solve everything. And I said,
Yeah,
that's a nice thought. But meanwhile, what about everybody in these 25 years who has to get to places? So I don't hear that anymore, which just makes me happy, although I do hear it in other areas of my life about there not being any people. But so that was huge. Attitudes changed. So even with professors and accommodations and having to go, well, I can't certify them. If they're having more time, that they're going to be engineers. And so, the beautiful thing was once they would meet and engage with students, and brilliant students, it changed their lives. So those were some of my best advocates who were saying, let's, start from the get-go, make sure this is accessible. And whether it was their classes. So it's really in every aspect of students' life, study abroad. Students couldn't go to any of I think we had about 11, I think we have 16 now or did, programs, and they were insistent. So I can remember over the years where the students said, I'm going to go, regardless if you let me or not. And so we had students, and this is probably more than 25 years ago, who studied in Puebla, Mexico. And we transported her, because that's the only way we could, with ambulances. And she's like, I don't care. I'm going to go learn Spanish. I want to hang out there. And she was now she's a professor over in Florida of all kinds of languages. But Students that were at Oxford, same thing, wheelchair users who we would just jimmy rig, sort of accommodations for them. And Sheila, my colleague, actually did so much of that work in touring all these broad centers and making, I think for the most part, most of them are wheelchair accessible and other ones. We found, I just love these stories because it just makes me smile. Students who were in Kyoto, and Sheila found a hostel that was accessible, and these people who were sort of amazing. Students who were studying in England, and so they used American Sign Language, and so we would find sign language interpreters that would go like 3 ways. So it was always, it was really exciting and a challenge. And I think that for me, because I love students and I find I always felt that college was the best time of your life. Like that was sort of my goal. Like I want them to have everything that any other student. So I will say it still makes me emotional when I go to a football game and see, students using chairs who are just hanging out with their friends, or at baseball games. And I'm like,
I love that story because it also really does embody and show the progress that is made literally with time. And so thank you for that beautiful story. You have referenced some acts, and I was just going to ask you a follow-up question to if you could share briefly what the ADA is and what the Rehabilitation Act is. I want to make sure that we have this because those are actually very important, relevant acts in this space.
And everybody jump in because, of course, I'm familiar, but in terms of articulating it, the Rehabilitation Act of 1978, I think it was pretty landmark. I mean, that's where you had all the activists in Berkeley and in San Francisco chaining themselves to City Hall. I mean, there are amazing videos and photographs of that, fighting for this. These are their civil rights. They couldn't go to the courthouse. They couldn't go to school. They couldn't do. And so this was landmark legislation, but for the most part, it only impacted those that had received federal money. And so you can imagine if you were, a pizza joint or theater or, even schools to that extent could work around it. But it gave us our first sort of even architectural guidelines. So how wide should a doorway be in order for somebody who uses a chair to go through? Or, it was any number of architecture. What should a ramp look like? Should it be like this? So that was huge, I think. And so that 78, and then in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. And this was revolutionary. I mean, it was for me anyway, because there it really had a lot of teeth in terms of individuals could file lawsuits, individual lawsuits. And I do think that, as an attorney, most times you don't want to go the litigation route, but sometimes you get tired of being nice and asking nicely. So, and it is our rights, all of our rights to be able to go to school, to go to the courthouse, to, go to Chuck E. Cheese, whatever that may be. And so it had regulations now for employers, accommodations, for public accommodations. So that means your football stadium, your stores, your auditoriums, transportation. Oh, geez, you mean the bus has to be accessible? So, as I said, it impacted almost every aspect of, society and life, not necessarily attitudes. That came later, and I still hear, why do we have to put in the ramp? You know what I mean? But I find it very hard to even respond to those kinds of questions. I just think just because, and I say to them, nobody complains when you have to put in fire alarms and all the money those cost, and nobody complains when you need a whole electrical outlet. Why is everybody so pissy about a ramp? I never understood that. I'm just like, it's just like any other regulation, except guess what? It's going to help you and a whole lot of people you don't even know. And, I see who uses ramps more are just everybody and anybody, wherever you are, with a baby carriage or bringing things or carrying things. And so, anyway, hopefully I covered most of the areas.
Thank you for the additional information and knowledge. I feel like
would it be possible to do an addendum to that? Just, in April of the year, we had a little bit an update to the rule of ADA for Title II. And so that means in 2 more years, all municipality government entity 50,000 and more has to be compliant with what's called the Web Content Accessibility Guideline 2.1 or what's that 2.1. 1 more year, and that not impact not only for state government but also schools. So all public schools K-12 has to be WCAG 2001 compliant within 2 or 3 years. And I think that could be another big jump. That'd be another interesting thing that will happen.
Thank you so much for that, for that context and update as well. We appreciate it. So my next question, and kind of pivoting here back to Stanford, going from legal national updates here to back to local here in Palo Alto. I'm going to ask Vioma next. Do you have any example that you can share where self-advocacy or advocacy through allyship created an opportunity for yourself or the disability community more broadly?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the thing that most comes to mind here is in my freshman year at UC Berkeley, I wrote a column on like my life as a disabled student for our student newspaper. And just one day, something that happened is I went to a talk in an engineering building where I don't know exactly what they do in that building, but something kind of dangerous because they don't have any entrances to the building on the ground floor. And you kind of like the way I got into the building was rather than taking the stairs, obviously, was going up through an elevator from another building, crossing into that building, and then going to the classroom that I needed to get to for the event. By the time the event ended, I think it must have been about 7 o'clock. The other building that I had used to get into this building had closed and it was locked. And I was like, okay, now how do I leave? Thankfully, this is, as far as I know, the only building at Berkeley that is like that. And so what I ended up doing, because I was with other folks who don't have mobility disabilities, who were like staying with me to make sure I could get out safely, is one of them like left through the stairs, got into the other building by banging on a door when they saw somebody sitting inside by the entrance, going up to the floor where I was, opening the door and letting me into that building where I could then take the elevator, go down and get out. So it was a very long, complicated process. It was a little bit scary because I didn't know if we would be able to find anyone in the other building that could let us in, but it ended up happening. The following week, I wrote my column about this experience and how wild it was that it happened in the first place. And then, funny enough, I got an email from my advisor for the Berkeley equivalent of the Office of Accessible Education, being like, hey, can you come in, want to talk to you about this? And so Berkeley administration had seen my column. They were worried that I was talking about this experience, and they would rather that I not talk about this experience. Obviously, it didn't work very well, as you see right now. But my advisor told me that they'd be willing to give me key card access to the other building, so I'm never in a situation where I am locked in one building and not able to get into the other. A very imperfect solution, but it was the best that they could do. And just by elevating this with a column that I had written that many people had read, it became a priority for them to get that support to me, and also for them to then reach out to other folks with mobility disabilities who needed access to that building, or even who didn't, because there shouldn't be restriction based on what you are specifically need as a, a major in a certain department or whatever, to then give them that access as well.
That's an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing that. By the way, I think it was referenced earlier, but just to highlight it again, Berkeley was actually a huge part of where the disability rights movement started. And if you haven't checked it out already, the Ed Roberts Campus Center in Berkeley is actually a really incredible space, and it's designed with inclusion and with disability in mind. And so the design itself is actually spectacular. And it's named after one of the father of the disability rights movement, Ed Roberts. So he and Judith Heumann, I'm sure many of you have also heard of Judith Heumann. Judith Heumann's also one of the key leaders among many others, but I just wanted to call that out here since it's here in the Bay Area on the other side. Yeah. So I was going to ask you as well, could you share any example, the same question, just to repeat the question, do you have any example where self-advocacy or advocacy through allyship created an opportunity either for yourself or the disability community?
Yeah, so well, situating SMATI within the diversity space, I think, was like very helpful because I had natural allies there that advocated for us to get funding and to be admitted to the diversity cabinet, like I mentioned in the video. But I would say that overall, students have been the best allies in this movement. I've been just so lucky to mentor, including yourself, but and a few other students. There was an article in the New England Journal of Medicine in, I think, 2021 by one of my mentees, Suchi Rastogi, and she had had such a miserable time in the hospital portion of her medical school that she wanted to, and I hear this a lot from people when they come to me, we need to make it so that nobody has to go through what I went through ever again. And so people are very motivated by the sense of injustice. But anyway, Suchi came to me and she told me her story and we wrote about it. And then we started advocating with the medical students with disability and chronic illness for a woman named Lisa Meeks from University of Michigan to come to the medical school and do like a comprehensive assessment of accessibility. And so she came and she wrote a report. We still haven't seen the report. The report has been stuck in the office of the general counsel for over a year, but they have acted on some of the recommendations, and there's the biggest win I think so far, and this is still a relatively new development, is that for the first time the medical school has their own Office of Accessible Education. So, the medical students, their accommodations the first 2 years when they're in the classroom are very similar to undergrads and totally appropriate for the central office to take care of. But unfortunately, the central office doesn't know much about the hospital environment and clinical rotations. And how do you accommodate a student who uses a wheelchair in the operating room, for example, or how does a deaf student use a stethoscope? And so they've brought in this woman who's pretty highly trained to do that. And that was just in November of 2023 that she started. So
we're very lucky to have her. She's awesome.
Yeah, very happy about that.
Yeah. Yes, Dr. Poulos. Oh, you told me to call you Pete. Pete, no, I'm not used to that. Pete has been a long-time mentor of mine, so thank you, Pete. I also just I actually will push back just a little bit on the accommodations, even in preclinicals. I actually think that it needs to be somebody who has experience in medicine, even for that portion of the curriculum, because, for example, we work in anatomy, we learn anatomy in these very specific environments and labs, and just knowing how to navigate the accessibility of the anatomy lab is a challenge in itself. And in fact, one thing I am personally proud of that we were able to do at my med school at UCLA was getting accessible anatomy tables, because they were not adjustable and you would have to stand on your feet for hours on end. And obviously that's not accessible for many types of disabilities. And so we were able to get accessible anatomy tables. But knowing how to navigate anatomy and other specific aspects of preclinicals, while the didactic portions are relatively similar to to undergrad, I think that there are certain aspects of the preclinical curriculum that are unique to medicine still. So,
Zena, can I say one thing?
mhm.
I was just gonna add, the first time I met Sheila was when I approached her. Has anybody gone up the dish? Yeah, well, there's no bathrooms up there. I'm like, I'm tired of running behind bushes. I'm just gonna be. So I emailed her and there's a bathroom there at the bottom now. Because this was really propelled not so much by me. I mean, I joke about it, but it's all true. But by a gal I met when I was working on my book, Letters Home, somehow met a current undergraduate, and she wanted, with Crohn's disease, and she wanted to walk the dish. And she tried, and she could, she just couldn't do it psychologically. It was really hard for her. Finally, it took her till her senior year to walk the dish. That's just a simple thing, So
That's beautiful. That's
it's all about bathroom access when you have.
It's very true. Thank you. Thank you for that story. That's a very powerful story. Thank you for sharing.
Well, and Sheila just said, sure. And every time I pass that porta potty when I'm driving on Foothill, I'm like, what?
I also just want to acknowledge how much of a like a force of nature Sheila is. She does so much work and was actually a big reason why we were able to get funding for the disability.stanford.edu website. So Sheila and this event as well. So thank you to Sheila. I just want to acknowledge that as well. Yeah. One last question for everyone, and then I want to make sure that we have time for everyone here to ask questions. The last question is, what do you hope for the future of disability to look like at Stanford? And I'm just going to go around again in circles. So we'll start with Rosa and then Al.
That it's seamless. That there isn't a need for accommodations, and I can go to a workshop, and to me anyway, things are in large print. Or when I go, or when we plan a field trip, and we automatically make sure that the buses have lifts, and that, oh geez, that dorm party, we're going to have it in the dorm. Let's make sure that it's on a floor that is accessible. So just that it's just like not even a thought of anybody. It's just, or maybe it's a thought, like any other, sort of a checklist. So that would be my wish. Yeah.
I've got a couple. One would be, Sheila, can we have another restroom at the top of the just say? And then the other thing is I've eaten in a lot of, Tressiter and Old Union. There's a restaurant there I really liked, and they had a plant-based burger that was great with a gluten-free bun, because I've tried to, just me personally, I'm not necessarily advocating it for anybody else, but I've tried to veer away from medical treatment for my Crohn's, and I do a lot of nutrition stuff. And the dining services, I think, have come a long way. And what I never so positive, the gluten-free, I'm here to tell you, the gluten-free hamburger bun at the is it called Old Union now? I don't know what it's called now, is free. And I have a thing about, why should I have to pay extra? And I know why, because it costs the restaurants additional money to get gluten-free stuff. So that's passed down to the customer, but it bugs me because I don't necessarily want to, but I do better when I have gluten-free stuff. So I'm hoping that the restaurants and the food situation for all events here on campus continues to go along in a diverse way, diversity of food. Yeah.
I love the specific examples that you give, because it's just a reminder of how far accessibility can go. So thank you for those specific examples. Yoma?
Yeah, I have so much I could say on this topic. I guess first thing is, I subscribe to the cultural model of disability, which is a variation of the social model that focuses on like this idea of disability, the disability community as a cultural group with a rich history and literature and arts theme to the entire community, just like every other like racial, ethnic, gender, religious, whatever other community that you can think of. And so what I would really love to see emphasized at Stanford is just the conceptualization of disability in this way a little bit more. That looks like building up a stronger disability studies program for students to learn about the disability community, disability philosophy, those sorts of things. Also like the respect of, I guess, the academic research community towards disability as a valid area of study in terms of like, I'm thinking about AI related things, like, and just that recognition would be so monumental for just integrating folks with disabilities into all kinds of broader conversations that are happening at a variety of different levels. The second thing is, I hope there will be an emphasis on the body-mind relationship in everyone, and particularly disabled folks. I am a head course assistant for a computer science class right now, where I am in charge of essentially implementing academic accommodation. And one of the significant concerns that I have just from like interacting with students is the, I guess, neglect I see of like their holistic health, of like, oh yes, you do have a physical disability, but you know that can also cause stress and brain fog and those sorts of things if you're worried about disability management, or, you know, vice versa, you can experience physical manifestations of certain sorts of non-physical disabilities. And just seeing that whole thing come together is really essential for the health of the student population overall, which is really important because Stanford students love to work really, really hard and sometimes neglect themselves, and I really don't like to see that. And that's something that in the disco space, we try to emphasize with our programming, like not only like building community, but also like providing food at our events to nourish the body as well, doing different sorts of activities. And I would love to see that happen more beyond the disco space and extend broadly into the campus practices as a whole.
Incredible. That's a tough answer to follow. That's amazing. Yeah, I think for me, we just need a total transformation of the way that disability is approached, and to stop looking at it as a deficit and start looking at it as a strength and something to be sought after as an essential part of human diversity. And I think, you know, only then, when we get rid of this false binary between disabled and non-disabled, can we really have true equality.
Well, thank you so much to all of you for your incredible thoughtfulness and responses. We're now going to leave some time for your questions, if anyone has any, and thank you all again for being here.
My name's John Gifford. I'm here for my reunion. I was here as an undergraduate. And my question would just be, what would you recommend for first-year students to get them, of all backgrounds and abilities and perspectives, to make them have more empathy and understanding of disability, and like specifically like books or essays that should be part of the freshman curriculum, perhaps presentations, activities with res ed, you name it. I mean, what in sort of a dream list would you like to, if there's not anything already part of that?
In the 90s, I think it was, there were students with disabilities who would do meetings at dorms. I thought that was a great idea, personally. I think I'd love to see that come back. I mean, I'm not on campus as a student, but another thing I would say, I think students see accommodations at work. This young woman I was talking about who I met, who had Crohn's disease as an undergrad and graduate student here. When she was an undergrad, she had requested access to a private restroom, and the only dorm she could be in was a law school dorm, and she was in a law school dorm as a freshman. That's not okay. That just really angered me. And it's just not okay. So if someone knows that she has a disability and she's in a dorm with students of all abilities, like I was in our freshman dorm, and then they're aware that the university, did this accommodation for her, and that's the way it should be. You know what I'm saying? Just by stuff that the university does too. Hopefully people become more aware.
I would say in terms of books, No Pity by Joseph Shapiro.
Mhm.
It talks about the disability rights movement, and it talks about the concept of inspiration. There is a term called inspiration porn, where people with disabilities are just referred to and called inspirations for literally showing up and doing the rock bottom, like things that everyone else would do. And there's a distinction between someone's work being inspirational versus just being inspirational for having a disability. And so there was actually a really great video on that as well. There are a lot of really great books I can send you after. It's just a little hard to do it in the moment without the actual physical names at hand. There are a couple of really great books about the movement of disability, and so that's one example. Another is a lot of roundtable discussions, kind of what you were mentioning, Al. But there's one that, for example, talks about privileges and like going and crossing the line if you have certain privileges. And so kind of thinking about when we have those discussions about various top identities, making sure that there's at least one discussion in disability in those conversations about privilege. Most oversimplification of that answer.
I was just going to say, I forgot that at the one Stanford Historical Society meeting, when we were talking about the disability at Stanford Oral History Project, someone suggested that some of these interviews could be shown to freshmen, portions of them.
I love that, actually, because then you can get the historical knowledge of Stanford, because that was something else that I was thinking about.
That's right.
Well.
That's right.
Any other, do we have time
No,
for more
we do.
questions?
I was going to come on camera. I just wanted to, there's a question on Zoom, and I think, when you were talking about a perfect world and a world of the future, what that looks like. For me, it's sort of, I feel like as allies, it's the see something, say something principle. It's when you see someone parking their bike and blocking a handrail or an entrance to a ramp, how can you gently encourage them not to do that? When someone says the word handicap, how can you gently and welcoming them in, saying that's outdated language, right? So I think that's something to be thinking about as allies. The question on Zoom was, we think about building ramps for, people with physical disabilities, and in the built environment, all the things that we're doing. But there's other things that we don't think about. And so when we think about people with disabilities who have fragrance, scent issues, and how are we making those spaces more welcoming? So thoughts on the panel about that, thoughts on what you might be doing in the disco space that could be replicated in the workplace, because I think it is sort of that, like, what's the big deal kind of mentality that you hear a lot. And so I think as a person with a disability, hearing that is just like, I don't belong here. So how do you manage that or navigate that?
First, Sheila, just briefly on your first point about like allyship. I am disabled, but in many ways, I consider myself an ally to folks with different kinds of disabilities who have different kinds of needs that I don't have. And so I think it's helpful for me to take that perspective of like I'm in a particular decision-making room, and unfortunately they might not be, but I still have a responsibility to talk about these things, even if even if it doesn't affect me directly, because this is something I've been thinking about in like my research and stuff, but like disability is a residual category, meaning that everyone who is quote unquote different in some way is sort of lumped together. And like, how can we use that diversity as strength and honor it while being together with each other, even though our life experiences might be so different? And so over in the disco space, we are thinking a lot about all of these things because like our student staff is 4 people. We are mighty, but we don't like represent every single type of disability and how they all manifest. So we take continuous feedback from students, and some of the things that we think about when planning our events that don't necessarily affect the 4 of us are things like like scent, availability of masks, temperature control, like different sorts of food options for different sorts of dietary restrictions. Those are all things that are really very easy to implement. But they're kind of subtle in that like a lot of people don't think that they have bearing on disability because, you know, it's not a ramp or an elevator, therefore it must not be important. So those are just some of those features, and there are many more we can talk about in that when we're in that space offline as well.
Inclusion takes constant effort. If you're not constantly paying attention to it, very easy to let it slide. So just have checklists either written or in our mind about like, you know, who's not here, who do we need to think about? If you don't do it every time, we'll forget. And then the other thing would be being open-minded about other categories, like people with scent, fragrance, sensitivities or other sensitivities.
And captioning.
Yeah.
I was going to ask Al. I feel like your perspective here would be really invaluable. Do you have anything else to add? Because I think you've given some examples in this that are relevant to this question.
Well, I just wanted to say I qualify for a disability sticker, parking sticker. I have never gotten one. My 3 kids could tell you so many stories. We're going down the freeway, gotta find a McDonald's, you know, and I'm throwing them all in the bathroom with me. I really should have had a disability sticker. And there's a story I've heard about a woman who came out of the medical center after an appointment at Stanford, and she has lupus, and some staff of the parking lot gave her a really hard time. People don't realize that people with invisible disabilities can have a parking sticker. And I think that, for example, if there's I love the whole thought about new students and what information they're given. I think that would be another one to provide.
Follow up on what you said about inclusion and your point about the question, the great question. A lot of companies and organizations are thinking about diversity, but diversity isn't the first point. Inclusion is the first point. Instead of DEI, it should be IED, or I mean, bring up bad ideas there. But because if you do inclusion first, you get diversity. And so by putting inclusion, I think, in the curriculum, or by putting inclusion in the orientation, by how in orientation we're talking about how do we make sure we're including everyone, not just disability, but making sure disability part of the equation, obviously. That could be a way to think about that. But I think inclusion is the key word that a lot of people forget about. But diversity tends to be mostly racial diversity for most people. They think of diversity as a racial component that's been kind of built up over the years. And we've had to fight hard to bring disabilities into that diversity equation. So inclusion, I think, is a good way to reframe it, but that's just my thought. I'll stop babbling.
You have to take, like, as supervisors in the state of California, we have to have harassment training every couple of years. And there's some information at the end of that about racial and ethnic issues. And like the very last page, it's almost like a footnote. There's a thing on disability. And it's just so woefully inadequate. And I find that many people want to do the right thing, but we're just all very poorly educated on that front.
Well, I'm sort of feeling what a thing to do would be to have a disability awareness program built into freshman orientation. But I'm not heading it up, obviously.
I think we can all chat for hours on this topic, but with respect of everyone's time, we're going to end here. And if there are any other follow-up questions, we'll still be around to chat. Thank you so much again for being here. This has been an honor. And again, thank you to Sheila for how, and to Natalie for everything you've put on.
Yes, and thank you to Dr. Jawadi, Pete, Dr. Poulos, Vioma, Al, and Rosa for being on the panel. I also want to give a shout out here to Miss Aubrey Lee, who was one of the more recent OGs to get the student disability community revived here on campus. And your work specifically helped to create some momentum around the disability community space. So thank you so much. We are inviting you all to continue the conversations. Vioma, do you want to just say the last words here?
Yeah, so we have had a disability community space, physical space, for not too long in the history of Stanford. It is through those two doors at the exit. If you just walk across the entrance area through the other two doors, we strongly recommend you check it out. Also, one of the fantastic things about our space is a really beautiful chalk wall that is managed by our undergraduate assistant coordinator, Sam, who has put on the wall a question about the future of disability at Stanford that we would love if you could all attempt to answer. Either grab a piece of chalk and write it up there yourself, or if you need assistance, Sam and others in the space can help you with that.
Thank you. Enjoy the refreshment.